The massive crystal chamber buzzed with alien voices as creatures from across the galaxy gathered to decide humanity's fate. Admiral Vextar stood tall on his 4 legs, his blue skin gleaming under the bright lights. His species, the Zephyrians, had ruled this part of space for thousands of years, and he was not happy about the newcomers. "The humans are a problem," he announced, his voice echoing through the huge room. "They ask too many questions. They change things that have worked fine for centuries. They make our trade partners nervous." Around the chamber, dozens of alien species nodded their agreement. The bug-like hive queens clicked their approval while the crystal beings pulsed with annoyed red light. Some aliens looked like giant jellyfish floating in tanks, while others were just balls of pure energy that hummed when they were upset. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 5 years ago when their primitive ships had stumbled into civilized space. At first, the aliens had been curious about these strange creatures who walked on 2 legs and had hair growing from their heads. But curiosity had quickly turned to irritation. The humans never followed the rules properly. When the Galactic Trade Council established shipping routes that had been used for 1,000,000 years, humans suggested improvements that made no sense to anyone else. When ancient diplomatic protocols required 7 days of formal greetings, humans wanted to skip straight to business. Worst of all, they kept asking why about everything. "I have a solution," Admiral Vextar continued, spreading his 4 arms wide. "We will show our generosity by giving them a gift. A ship worthy of their ambitious nature." The chamber fell silent. Even the energy beings stopped their constant humming. Every species in the galaxy knew what ship he meant. "The Sepulchre," whispered the Hive Queen, her insect voice translated into standard speech. The Sepulchre was legendary throughout known space. It was a massive ship left behind by the predecessors, an ancient race that had vanished millions of years ago. The ship was bigger than most space stations, but it had been floating dead in the void reaches for longer than anyone could remember. Every major civilization had tried to fix it, study it, or at least strip it for parts. Nothing worked. The ship was completely dead. "We exiled them to that worthless hulk," Vextar explained, his mandibles clicking in what passed for a smile among his people. "They can take their entire population and drift in the empty regions where they cannot bother civilized species. If they survive, they will learn humility. If they do not..." He shrugged his 4 shoulders. The vote was unanimous. 3 days later, Captain James Mitchell stood in his ready room aboard the human flagship Endeavour, staring at the official message on his screen. He was a tough man who had served in Earth's military for 30 years, but this news made his stomach turn. "Lisa, get in here," he called to his first officer. Commander Lisa Harper entered quickly, her red hair tied back and her green eyes alert. She had served with Mitchell for 8 years and could tell when something was seriously wrong. "They're giving us a ship," Mitchell said, showing her the message. Harper read it twice, her face growing pale. "The Sepulchre? Captain, that thing has been dead for 1,000,000 years. No atmosphere, no power, no working systems. They want us to move 3 billion people onto a floating tomb." Mitchell walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human colonies on dozens of worlds were preparing to abandon their homes. Families were packing their belongings, not knowing if they would survive the journey to their new gift. "It gets worse," he said quietly. "We have to relocate to the void reaches. That's the emptiest part of space, Lisa. No trade routes, no help if things go wrong, no way home." Harper sat down heavily. "They're not exiling us, sir. They're executing us slowly." "That's exactly what they're doing." Mitchell turned back to face her. "But we're not going to give them the satisfaction of watching us die quietly. Contact Dr. William Foster on Research Station 7. If anyone can figure out how to keep us alive on that ancient wreck, it's him." 2 weeks later, the largest evacuation in human history was underway. Thousands of transport ships carried people from every human world toward a rendezvous point in deep space. Children pressed their faces to windows, watching their home planets shrink to tiny dots behind them. Parents tried to stay calm while privately wondering if they would ever see another sunrise. When they finally reached the meeting point, even the bravest souls fell silent at their first sight of the Sepulchre. The ancient ship stretched across 50 kilometers of space, its hull a confusing mixture of materials that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Some parts looked like metal, others like crystal or stone, and some like nothing anyone had ever seen before. "Dear God," whispered Dr. William Foster as he stood beside Captain Mitchell on the bridge. The old scientist had studied alien technology his entire career, but this was beyond anything in his experience. "It's not just big, James. It's impossible. Look at these readings." His instruments showed corridors that twisted back on themselves, rooms that were bigger inside than outside, and gravity fields that pointed in directions that made no sense. The ship had been built by minds that understood physics very differently than humans did. "Can we live on it?" Mitchell asked. Foster was quiet for a long moment, studying his tablet. "The atmosphere would kill us in minutes. The power systems died before humans even learned to make fire. The life support systems are completely gone." He paused. "But there are strange readings in some sections. As if parts of the ship are still dreaming." On the main screen, Admiral Vextar appeared one last time. Behind him, aliens from dozens of species watched the human evacuation with obvious amusement. Some were pointing at the primitive human ships and making sounds that their translators rendered as laughter. "Farewell, humans," Vextar said, his forearms spread wide in a mocking gesture. "May you find the peace in death that you never found in life. The galaxy will remember your brief, troublesome visit to civilization." The transmission ended, and the alien ships jumped away to hyperspace, leaving humanity alone with their floating coffin in the coldest, emptiest part of known space. Mitchell watched the first shuttle loads of families heading toward the dead ship and made a silent promise. They had given humanity a tomb. He was determined to make it a home. 6 months had passed since humanity's exile to the sepulchre, and life aboard the ancient ship was a daily struggle for survival. The massive vessel had become a maze of makeshift homes connected by corridors that seemed to play tricks on anyone trying to navigate them. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on walls that were part metal, part crystal, and part something that no human scientist could identify. Robert Kane wiped sweat from his forehead as he worked on another broken air processor. The burly engineer had been fighting the ship's systems every day since they arrived, trying to keep 3 billion people breathing in a vessel that seemed determined to kill them. His tools were spread across what looked like it had once been some kind of alien church, complete with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Any luck with the power?" asked Dr. Emma Watson as she approached, her medical scanner beeping warnings about the air quality. The pretty blonde doctor had become an expert at treating people for the dozens of health problems caused by living on a dead ship. "Still running everything off portable generators," Kane replied, pointing at the thick cables that snaked through the hallway like electronic vines. "But here's the weird thing, I keep finding connection points that almost seem made for our equipment. It shouldn't work, but somehow it does." Watson nodded, making notes on her tablet. As the mission's chief doctor and scientist, she had been studying the ship's strange biology. Large sections of the sepulchre seemed to be alive, breathing slowly and responding to changes in temperature like a sleeping animal. "Have you heard about what the exploration teams found?" she asked. Kane shook his head. The ship was so huge that teams had been mapping it for months and had barely covered 10% of the interior. "They found a room that's different from the others," Watson continued. "It's actually working. Dr. Foster wants to put together a team to check it out." 3 levels down, in a section the humans called Area 7 Alpha, 8-year-old Lucy Green was playing hide-and-seek with her 10-year-old brother David while their parents attended another emergency meeting about food supplies. The children had been exploring the safer parts of the ship, turning the ancient hallways into their personal playground. "Look what I found, Lucy," David called out, his voice echoing strangely in a round room they had never seen before. The walls were covered in patterns that seemed to glow with soft inner light, and the air here felt different, cleaner somehow, like breathing in a forest after rain. Lucy walked toward one of the wall panels, drawn by its gentle glow. Unlike the harsh emergency lights the adults used everywhere else, this light felt warm and friendly. When she pressed her small hand against the smooth surface, the patterns grew brighter, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. "David, look at this," she whispered, her blue eyes wide with wonder. The room responded to her touch like a flower opening to sunlight. Walls that had been dark for millions of years began to glow, and somewhere deep inside the ship, systems that had been waiting for the right moment finally started to wake up. Dr. Foster was reviewing reports about structural damage when every piece of monitoring equipment in the human sections began going crazy. Alarms started blaring as energy readings jumped higher than anything they had ever recorded. "What's happening?" Captain Mitchell demanded as he ran into their makeshift command center, which they had built inside what might have once been a meeting room for the ship's original alien builders. "I don't know, sir," replied Mary Stevens, a young technician whose fingers were flying over her keyboard. "We're reading massive power activation throughout the entire ship. It started in Area 7 Alpha and it's spreading everywhere." Foster grabbed his tool bag. "That's where the green kids were playing. We need to get down there right now." They found Lucy and David standing in the center of a room that had transformed into something magical. The walls now showed star maps that were more complex and beautiful than anything humans had ever created, with three-dimensional pictures that seemed to float in the air without any projectors. The air itself seemed to hum with power, but somehow it felt safe and protective. Lucy turned around when the adults rushed in, her face bright with excitement. "Look what we found. The ship was just sleeping, but now it's waking up." As if it understood her words, the room's displays changed, showing pictures of the sepulchre as it had been long ago. Not a dead hulk, but a magnificent ship full of life and purpose. The aliens who had built it hadn't just made a vehicle, they had created something that was part ship, part home, and part living being. Foster approached carefully, his scanner showing energy levels that should have been deadly but somehow felt as gentle as warm sunlight. "Lucy, what did you do?" The little girl shrugged, swinging her blonde pigtails. "I just said hello. Mommy always says you should be polite when you meet someone new." Dr. Watson knelt down beside the children, her medical scanner showing readings that made no sense. "The ship is responding to them," she whispered to Foster. "It's like it recognizes them somehow." Around them, the ancient vessel continued its awakening. Lights that had been dark for a million years began to glow. Air that had been poisoned started to become breathable. Systems that the greatest minds in the galaxy had declared permanently broken began to repair themselves. Captain Mitchell felt something touch his mind, gentle, curious, and incredibly old. Images flowed through his thoughts, the ship's builders in their final days, not dying but becoming something more, uploading their knowledge into vessels like the sepulchre. They had scattered these ships across the galaxy, waiting for a species that could bridge the gap between logic and creativity, between order and chaos. "We weren't exiled," Mitchell whispered, understanding flooding through him. "We were chosen." The ship had waited a million years for someone to treat it as a friend rather than a tool to be used. As more systems came online throughout the massive vessel, humanity began to realize that their floating coffin had just become something unprecedented, a living ship that had chosen them as its partners. The sepulchre was no longer dead. It was finally coming home. The changes started small, so gradually that many people didn't notice them at first. Hallways that had been narrow and twisting slowly became wider and more comfortable. The harsh emergency lighting that had hurt everyone's eyes began to fade, replaced by a warm, golden glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Robert Kane stood amazed as he watched a section of wall flow like thick honey, reshaping itself to fit the water cleaning system he had been struggling to install for weeks. The ship wasn't just accepting their human modifications anymore, it was making them better, improving them in ways Kane had never imagined possible. "This can't be real," muttered Dr. William Foster as he stared at the readings on his instruments. "The ship is rebuilding itself at the smallest possible level, changing the very atoms that make up its structure. This violates every law of science I know." Captain James Mitchell joined them in what had been a cramped maintenance tunnel yesterday but was now a spacious walkway. Around them, families moved freely through corridors that automatically adjusted their temperature and lighting to make humans comfortable. Children played in small rooms that hadn't existed the day before, their happy laughter echoing through halls that seemed to respond with their own gentle music. "How long do you think this will continue?" Mitchell asked. Foster shook his head slowly. "I don't think it's going to stop, Captain. If anything, the changes are getting faster. The ship isn't just fixing itself, it's growing, learning, becoming something new. Look at this." He led them to a small window that had grown overnight into a magnificent viewing area. Through the clear surface, space itself looked different. Stars traced patterns of impossible beauty, and the darkness between them shimmered with colors that no human language had words for. "We're not just passengers living inside this ship anymore," Foster continued. "We're part of it now. It's learning from us, adapting to our needs, our hopes, even our dreams when we sleep." Young Thomas Reed approached from the direction of the ship's new control center, a room that had grown around their makeshift bridge like a flower blooming in fast motion. "Captain, you need to see this. The ship is trying to talk to us." They followed him to the heart of the sepulchre, where Lucy Green sat cross-legged on the floor. The 12-year-old girl had her small hands resting on what looked like a control panel made of solid light. Pictures flowed around her, not on screens, but hanging in the air like living photographs. "Hello, Captain Mitchell," Lucy said without looking up from her work. "The ship wants to show you something important." The room around them changed, walls becoming invisible to reveal the vastness of space beyond. But this wasn't the empty darkness they had always known. Streams of energy connected distant galaxies, and patterns of incredible complexity wove through the cosmic web like the universe's own nervous system. A presence touched Mitchell's mind, ancient beyond measure, vast as a galaxy, but somehow gentle and kind. Images flowed through his consciousness like a river of memories. He saw the ship's original builders in their final days, not dying from disease or war but choosing to become something more than physical beings. They had uploaded their entire civilization into ships like the Sepulchre, then scattered them across the galaxy to wait. They had been waiting for a species that could bridge the gap between order and chaos, between logical thinking and creative inspiration. A species that could grow and change rather than remain frozen in perfection. "We were chosen," Mitchell whispered, understanding flooding through every part of his being. Not punished or exiled, chosen. Dr. Emma Watson had been studying the ship's living systems when she made her own startling discovery. In what the humans had designated as the farming section, plants from Earth were growing with impossible speed and health. Their roots had intertwined with organic tubes that pulsed with the ship's heartbeat, creating a partnership between human agriculture and alien biology. "The ship is learning from everything we do," she reported to the expanding council of department heads. "Our crops, our technology, our social structures, even the way we organize our families. It's taking human concepts like backup systems and modular design, but enhancing them beyond anything we could have imagined." Engineer Mary Stevens had found herself working alongside systems that seemed to know what she needed before she asked. Tools shaped themselves to fit her hands perfectly, and control panels responded to her thoughts as easily as to her touch. "It's not just adapting to us," she explained to her amazed team. "We're adapting to it too. I can feel the ship's systems in my mind now. Not controlling me, working with me." The transformation wasn't limited to technology and machinery. The ship had begun growing what could only be called neighborhoods, spaces designed around human social needs and psychological comfort. There were parks where impossible trees bore fruit that tasted like childhood memories of summer. Libraries appeared where knowledge flowed directly into willing minds. Workshops materialized where human creativity merged with alien understanding to create marvels that neither species could have achieved alone. Captain Mitchell found himself spending hours in direct communication with the ship's vast intelligence, learning its billion-year history and sharing humanity's much shorter but equally precious story. The Sepulchre had been waiting not just for any intelligent species, but specifically for one that valued growth over safety, questions over answers, and the courage to transform rather than simply survive. "We're becoming something new," he told the assembled population during their weekly gathering in the ship's new central plaza. 3 billion humans now lived comfortably within a vessel that had somehow grown large enough to house them all, its interior spaces bending the laws of physics to provide room for entire cities suspended within its hull. "The question is," he continued, feeling the ship's warm approval through their growing mental bond, "what do we do with this incredible gift?" 10-year-old David Green, Luce's brother, raised his hand high. "Maybe we should go back and say thank you to the aliens who were mean to us." The adults chuckled at his innocent suggestion, but Mitchell felt the ship's strong agreement pulse through their connection. The Sepulchre wasn't just a vessel or even a home, it was a teacher, and their first lesson was about to begin. 2 years had passed since humanity's exile when strange stories began reaching the Galactic Confederation. Ship captains throughout known space reported mysterious rescues by vessels that appeared from nowhere, helped them, then vanished before anyone could properly thank them or even get a good look at their saviors. Admiral Vextar dismissed these reports as typical spacer fantasies until the hegemony of SCORE launched what they called the final cleansing against the peaceful Deltan colonies. The Deltans were a gentle species of water-breathing philosophers who had never built weapons or fought wars. They survived through wisdom and diplomacy, making them easy targets for the violent SCORE military machine. The attack on Delta Prime began without warning on a quiet Tuesday morning. SCORE warships dropped from the sky like metal death birds, their powerful plasma cannons turning the beautiful crystal cities into pools of melted glass. Within hours, millions of innocent Deltans floated dead in the poisoned waters of their homeworld. That was when it appeared. The Sepulchre materialized in the Delta system not with the violent flash of a normal space jump, but slowly, like a magnificent sunrise. The ancient vessel had grown enormously during its time in the void. Its hull now stretched across nearly 100 kilometers of space, and gardens were clearly visible through transparent sections of its surface. Lights that seemed warmer than stars traced beautiful patterns along its elegant curves. Captain James Mitchell stood in the ship's new command center, no longer entirely human but not yet something completely different either. His mind flowed through the Sepulchre systems while his body remained connected to the physical world. Around him, other humans worked in perfect harmony with the ship's intelligence, their thoughts and intentions becoming reality with a fluidity that would have seemed like magic to their former selves. "SCORE Fleet Commander, this is Captain Mitchell of the vessel Sepulchre," he broadcast on all radio frequencies. "Stop your attack on the Deltan colonies immediately." The score response was exactly what everyone expected. Admiral Grexnor, commanding a fleet of 300 warships, had earned his reputation by completely destroying 17 different species. To him, humans were just another target to be eliminated. Humans? Grexnor's laugh sounded like grinding metal through the radio. "The galaxy thought you were dead. We will fix that mistake right now." The entire score fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons that could melt mountains, antimatter missiles that could crack planets, and fusion bombs capable of destroying entire cities streaked toward the Sepulchre. The weapons struck the ship's hull and simply stopped. Not bounced off or absorbed, but frozen in place, held in bubbles of twisted space and time that turned them into harmless light shows. "Dr. Foster, please show them how we respond to violence," Mitchell said calmly. Dr. William Foster, his consciousness now partially merged with the ship's engineering systems, nodded with a slight smile. Around each score warship, space itself began to thicken like invisible honey. The effect didn't crush the ships or hurt their crews, but simply held them perfectly still in fields of crystallized time. The score warriors found themselves conscious and aware but completely unable to move. Their weapons were offline, their ships as helpless as insects trapped in amber. "Your crews are completely unharmed," Mitchell continued his broadcast to the paralyzed fleet. "But they will remain frozen in time until you withdraw from Deltan space and agree to pay for the damage you have caused." The few remaining score admirals whose ships hadn't been caught in the time fields raged and made threats, but their weapons were useless against a ship that treated the laws of physics as gentle suggestions rather than absolute rules. Within hours, the entire score armada hung motionless in space, a monument to the futility of using violence against beings who had grown beyond conventional limitations. The rescue and healing of the surviving Deltans took 3 days. The Sepulchre extended what looked like living tentacles that cleaned the poison from their waters and regrew their crystal cities using materials that were somehow more beautiful than the originals. Dr. Emma Watson worked alongside Deltan doctors, sharing medical knowledge that could heal even the most severely injured using technologies that seemed to bend reality itself. When the work was finished, the Deltan Prime Minister approached the Sepulchre in a small diplomatic vessel. To his amazement, the great ship opened like a flower, allowing him to enter chambers that were part garden, part laboratory, and part something that had no name in any language. "Why?" was the only word he could manage when Captain Mitchell met him in a corridor lined with trees that bore fruit from dozens of different worlds. Mitchell smiled, and for a moment the Deltan could see the echo of who he had once been, a career military officer trying to do the right thing in an unfair universe. "Because someone should have helped us when we needed it. Because strength without kindness is just another form of destruction." News of the score defeat spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. The humans, supposedly dead in the distant void, had returned with power that made the greatest civilizations look like children playing with toys. But what disturbed the established order even more was their restraint. They could have destroyed the score fleet completely, but instead had simply embarrassed them. Admiral Vextar stood in the Confederation Council chambers, his forearms trembling as he read report after report. Around him, representatives from dozens of species whispered in languages that all expressed the same basic emotion: fear. "Send an immediate request for a meeting with the human commander," he finally said, his voice lacking all of its usual arrogance and pride. "Tell them that the Galactic Confederation wishes to discuss the terms of their return to civilized space." But the Sepulchre had already vanished from the Delta system, leaving only a message that was broadcast to every inhabited world in known space: "To those who choose growth over stagnation, cooperation over conquest, we offer friendship. To those who would harm the innocent, know that the void watches, and the void remembers." The galaxy would never be the same again. The Sepulchre floated in the neutral zone between galactic territories, no longer hiding in the distant void but openly visible to anyone who chose to look. The ship had grown again, now looking less like a vessel and more like a small world wrapped in gardens and shining towers. Streams of smaller ships came and went from its docking areas, not just human craft, but vessels from dozens of species who had accepted humanity's offer of friendship and partnership. Admiral Vextar's shuttle approached the magnificent vessel with none of the ceremony that had once accompanied Zephyrian diplomatic missions. The proud warrior who had condemned humanity to exile now came as a humble visitor, his forearms folded in his species' traditional posture of respect and submission. The docking bay that received him was a wonder of living architecture. The walls pulsed with gentle bioluminescent patterns that welcomed him warmly. Gravity adjusted itself automatically to his comfort, and the air changed to match his species' preferences perfectly. Even in his nervousness, Vextar could not help but marvel at the casual mastery of natural forces he witnessed. Captain James Mitchell met him at the entrance, and Vextar barely recognized the human he had once dismissed as primitive. Mitchell appeared younger than he had 2 years ago, his eyes bright with an inner light that seemed to reflect the stars themselves. Around him, the ship's corridors hummed with contentment like a living creature at peace. "Admiral," Mitchell said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome aboard our home." They walked through halls that changed their shape and design to accommodate both human and Zephyrian needs, passing rooms where beings from across the galaxy worked together on projects that seemed to defy easy explanation. In one chamber, crystal-based architects collaborated with human engineers to design buildings that existed in multiple dimensions at once. In another, the pure energy beings of the Void Collective shared consciousness expansion techniques with human philosophers and teachers. "I don't understand," Vextar said finally, his voice filled with confusion. "We exiled you to die. We expected never to see you again. Why do you welcome us with friendship instead of revenge?" Mitchell paused beside a large window that showed the universe beyond, not the cold emptiness of space, but a beautiful tapestry of connected energy streams that revealed the hidden unity underlying all existence. "Because we learned something very important during our exile," Mitchell replied thoughtfully. "The ancient race who built this ship faced the same choice that every civilization must face eventually: do we grow or do we stay the same? Do we include others or shut them out? Do we become more than we were, or do we just repeat the same patterns that created our problems in the first place?" They entered the ship's new heart, a vast chamber where the boundaries between living and artificial, individual and group, had completely dissolved. At its center, Lucy Green sat in communion with the ship's vast intelligence. Now 16 years old, she was no longer quite the child who had first awakened the ancient vessel. Her consciousness flowed through systems that spanned light years, coordinating the activities of dozens of species who had chosen transformation over tradition. "The original builders of this ship died," Lucy said without opening her eyes, her voice carrying musical harmonics that spoke directly to the listener's soul. "Not from war or disaster, but from success. They became so advanced, so perfect in their ways, that they forgot how to grow and change. They built ships like the Sepulchre as their final act, hoping that someday, someone would find the balance between order and creativity that they had lost." Vextar watched in amazement as holographic displays showed the expanding network of ancient ships awakening throughout the galaxy. Each one was responding to a different species that had chosen cooperation over competition, growth over safety. The prehistoric vessels weren't just advanced technology, they were teachers, partners in evolution for any civilization ready to move beyond its current limitations. "Your species is welcome to join us," Mitchell said gently. "But not as conquerors or rulers like before. As students, as partners in becoming something greater than any of us could achieve alone." Dr. William Foster approached, his form now more energy than solid matter but still recognizably human in its essential nature. "The ship wants to show you something, Admiral. Are you ready to see the future we're building together?" The chamber around them transformed, walls becoming transparent to reveal the cosmic web in all its magnificent glory. But now the web was no longer empty space between galaxies, it pulsed with life, with consciousness, with the dreams and hopes of countless species working together toward a common goal of growth and understanding. "This is what the ancient builders glimpsed before they transcended physical existence," Foster explained with quiet wonder. "A galaxy where every species contributes its unique gifts to a symphony of consciousness. Where diversity becomes strength, where growth never ends, and where the only limits are the ones we choose to accept for ourselves." Vextar felt tears streaming down his blue-skinned face, tears of wonder, of shame for his past actions, and of hope for a future he had never dared to imagine possible. "What must I do to be part of this?" "Return to your people," Mitchell said with gentle kindness. "Share what you've seen here today. Not all will choose to join us, and that's perfectly fine, that's their right. But for those ready to grow beyond what they've always been, the door will always be open." As Vextar's shuttle departed, the Sepulchre began to move again. Not fleeing to the void this time, but traveling toward the galactic center where more ancient sites waited to be awakened. The ship carried with it the seeds of transformation, humans and aliens working together to nurture a future where consciousness itself became the next great frontier to explore. In her chamber at the ship's heart, Lucy Green smiled as she felt the thoughts of millions of beings across the galaxy, some fearful, some hopeful, all struggling with the eternal question of whether to remain safe in the known or risk growth into the unknown. The Sepulchre had taught humanity that what appears to be an ending can become a beginning, that exile can become invitation, and that even a floating coffin can become the birthplace of wonders beyond imagination. The galaxy held its breath and prepared to evolve.